Okay, let's see. Let's set all this up. Hopefully Facebook will work for me. So before I just did a live on the Playbook conference, and unfortunately Facebook wasn't playing ball at all. So I'm hoping that Facebook will work now. And yeah, hello everyone. I should be live now on all 3 channels, and hopefully the live will stick as well. And I will be able to read all of your comments. It looks like comments are here on, yeah, great. Okay, I can see comments now on YouTube. I couldn't see comments on YouTube for the last live of the Playbook conference. I'm glad to see that's fixed. Yeah, hi Lincoln, nice to see you. Hi Abel. Garfia, nice to see you. Let's see. Hello everyone joining. It's nice to see you all. Thank you so much for coming and for joining me today for the conference. Sorry, the conference for this live about language learning. And yeah, it follows on from a conference, Polyglot conference live that I just had now. We had a few technical issues with Facebook, but hopefully this is going to work well. Good evening as well to you, Chima. Nice to see you. So I'm going to start as usual with the questions I got when I said that I was going to do this live. I should also, first of all, just apologise for the half-an-hour delay. Unfortunately, I woke up this morning quite sick, feeling having this terrible headache, and it's affected my entire day. So here I am. Fortunately, I was kind of a bit worried that I wasn't going to be able to make it at all, to be honest. But I started feeling a bit better, and I thought, okay, well, it's always nice, and it always makes me feel quite happy after I've had a live talking to all of you lovely people. You always make me feel happy. So yeah, worth it. It would just make me feel better just by being here. So salam, nice to see you. Very nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Ciao, ciao, tutto bene? Canada, cool. Okay, let me see. So the questions that I had coming in. How good is it to practice languages talking to ourselves? I think actually talking to yourself is a pretty good way to practice what you're learning. So yes, I'm a big fan of talking to yourself. I know it sounds like a funny thing to say, but yeah, I'm a fan of talking to yourself. I think that it can be quite helpful. It definitely helps you practice what you're going through and what you're talking and what you should be learning. And so I say yes, do talk to yourself in different languages, and you'll find that it will help your fluency. It will help you retain vocabulary. It will help you internalize the grammar and the structures of the language. And how it does it is that you're saying it over and over again, and you need to keep repeating things and hearing things many times before it becomes automatic. And language learning is about the language becoming automatic for you. Yeah, so I actually think that's a good idea. Lep pozdravi Slovenia, lep pozdravi Skopje. Kako gre? What is your new target language? I see this now from Lord. So yes, that's a good question. And somebody actually asked me about one of the new languages that I've started looking at, which is Cornish, and said, which course am I using for Cornish? I'm actually following a course online, and they use a book. There's actually, I can drop a link somewhere for you to find out. I'll probably actually do that on, I might start a thread on the Polyglot Conference forum about Cornish and about the languages I'm learning, so that you can see. So if anybody's interested in that kind of thing, then you can find things out. But yeah, it's really nice at the moment. It's very basic, obviously, because it's only the start of the language. But it's that fun time, you know, when you're learning new words, and it's all very exciting. So at the moment, yeah, I'm doing this Cornish. I'm also doing language lessons in a few other languages to improve my level. So I'm kind of taking things slowly with some of the languages I do. So slow burning languages for me, particularly because at the moment I don't have very much free time to dedicate to much. I have to be honest with myself and my time, and with the conference fast approaching, most of my free time is basically dedicated to working on the conference. So I'm really organising that and making sure that it goes ahead and works well. So I don't have as much time for language learning as I normally do, but it's a lot of fun, and I think it's important to just be honest with yourself of what time you've got, and not to worry about giving yourself crazy deadlines and crazy things to achieve if you really don't physically have the time. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, and I'm doing sort of carrying on. My Persian is kind of just simmering at the moment, I'd say. So I'm not really learning a lot of new stuff in Persian, but I'm just kind of trying to keep it as to where I had it, so that when I'm freed up with more time, I can actually move on with it in a more meaningful way. Unfortunately, though, this morning I was supposed to have a Persian lesson, and because I wasn't very well. I had to cancel it. I couldn't do the lesson. It would have been impossible for me. So yeah, be kind to yourself with be kind to yourselves with language learning as well. I'm just going to go through how do you get the best of using LinkQ. So Link, basically, and I do the same for all the stories. What I would do is on one day I would listen to a story, because they've got the 60 stories for most of the languages. They have the full 60 stories. So I find the Link stories. I go through story 1. Listen to it, read along with it, answer the questions, and then move to story 2 the next day. But before I listen to story 2, I listen to story 1 again, and then listen to story 2. So I'm doing a repetition of story 1. Then the following day, story 2, and I listen to again and listen to story 3. And I do that so that I'm getting a bit of repetition, and also because the idea of Link is that you don't need to memorize everything that's in a story to be able to move on. The idea is that a lot of the grammar will be there and the vocabulary will be there each time, so you can move through it, and basically, yeah, you'll pick up the language as you move forward with it. So that's how I get the most out of it, just doing that, and then listening to it sometimes in the background, listening to the dialogues again, the time. But yeah, I think for me that works fairly well actually with Link. And I've just discovered Closemaster, which is you can put if you go on Closemaster, you can sort of play with trying to recreate vocabulary, sentences that you want. If you've got a pro account, you can actually write your own sentences that you play with it a bit, and it looks quite promising. To kind of activate some of the language as well. So yeah, I think that in combination with Link might be quite a cool tool, because there's no kind of limit to where you get with it, and you can also be, you can use it for what you want to use it for, which is really useful. With Link as well, you can add your own stories, and so new stories add in the just having either just you read it and then you pick out the words that you don't know, you just see them and understand them. But I never take a huge amount of time to just memorize vocabulary when I'm going through Link, simply because I think that when you've been exposed to it enough, you will just pick it up. Certain vocabulary you may want to practice over and over again to get it. Of course, I mean there is a need to do that, but you will pick it up over time. It just takes time. So yeah, with that and with Closemaster, I'm thinking that maybe I can start using both. And Closemaster has Cornish on as well, which is cool. And I have another question: how do you achieve a native-like accent? It's a very difficult one. I never try to sound native. Sometimes, on some occasions, I can sound near-native in some of my languages. And I'm not going to pretend that I sound like or pass for native in any of the languages 100% of the time, because that's just foolish and also not necessary. I'm never going to not be British. I am British, and that's it's part of my identity. It's who I am, and I don't shy away from that. I'm not ashamed of my background. I'm quite happy that English is my first language, and then any languages I learn, then I try and learn to the best of my abilities if I need them to that very high level. But I wouldn't aim for a native accent always, simply because there's another reason why. If you're learning a language and you speak a little bit, and then you have a very, very close near-native-like accent, it can actually sound very strange because people assume that you speak the language better than you actually do. And when you make mistakes, it often sounds worse when you've got a near-native accent because people aren't expecting you to make mistakes. And they sometimes look at you as if you're a bit silly. And I have had that experience before when I've spoken a language and the accent was good, but I didn't actually have much of the language. So I'm a little bit cautious about the whole native sounding accent. And I think sometimes just I'm more of a natural mimic, so I do pick up on it sort of in a more natural way sometimes. But then there are languages that I will always sound quite foreign, and I'm quite happy with that as long as my pronunciation is good. And to do that, to get your pronunciation right, so that people understand you clearly, the important things to look out for are recording yourself, comparing yourself to an original recording that you're listening to, and getting feedback from people who speak the language natively as well, or speak the language very fluently. Don't have to be a native per se. And then you try and ask them questions about the position of where their tongue is in the mouth, where whether the throat's vibrating, what other letters it sounds like, how it's similar, how it feels for them. Because sometimes using very very technical terms can be a little bit off-putting either for the learner or the speaker of the language, because they may not know them themselves. So ask them very normal questions like, where is your tongue? Where does the air pass through your tongue? Where does, things like that make them think a little bit about it. And also it helps you to position your tongue to mimic that, and then you can try to pronounce it in a similar way. So things like that are important. Not skipping over the whole first chapters of books that deal with pronunciation. That's a very good key, because we do tend to do that when we buy a book. We go straight to the hello, how my name is, and that's great because we think it's boring, right? To look at the alphabet and to look at the pronunciation. Sometimes in some languages it's really, really important. And I know that when I did Swedish at university, we did a whole year of just pronunciation. And my teacher wrote the colloquial Swedish book. His name's Dr. Philip Holmes, and he wrote the colloquial Swedish book. And the pronunciation bit is quite thin, but we took an entire year using that as a basis and expanding on it with lots of other sorts of words, other exercises, and we recorded ourselves, we listened back to ourselves, we got feedback from teachers so that we could get our Swedish pronunciation as close to what you'd expect to hear as somebody speaking Swedish as possible. Naturally, some sounds are difficult to make, and it's not the end of the world. It's just for some languages, especially when they're small languages and they're not used to hearing people speak the languages. If you have a very strong accent with incorrect pronunciation, it does make it very difficult for them to understand. I know that's the case in the Balkans for many of the languages because they're just not used to hearing foreigners speaking their languages. For bigger languages like Spanish or English or even Chinese, Russian, people are more used to foreigners learning. So they do understand when you speak, and German or somewhere else would be the same. So they do understand and they do get it, and they do know that some sounds are difficult to make for certain speakers of other languages where those sounds just don't exist. So yes, that's what I would say about this whole native thing, and pronunciation is the most important thing. So work on pronunciation and use those techniques that I've just explained, and that you'll find, I think, is probably the better way of going about it. How do you accelerate the language learning process? So the way to accelerate language learning is quite simple. Practice as often as possible throughout the week. Use the language, listen to the language, and read the language as often as possible throughout the week. And then instead of just doing 2 hours a week where you have your lessons, maybe 1 hour on a Monday, 1 hour on a Thursday or a Friday, as I often do with my languages, you're actually using the language all the way through the week as well. Say you may do half an hour of revision of what you did on the Monday night for the Monday class. Same thing on Friday, but then also you will then throughout the week do some listening exercises, listen to songs, learn a song, You may watch something about the country, about the language, with bits of the language mixed in. If you're a beginner, it may be an entire series in the language that you watch. You may want to mix it with a bit of reading. You may want to do, and you can mix it up every day. Okay, you don't have to do the same thing every day. You can also just revise what you've been doing in class, so that the vocabulary starts to seep in and sink in, and you memorize the vocabulary a lot more quickly if you see it and review it very often. Now, recently for me, that's not been possible, so I do feel the difference when I don't do that, and I'm very aware that when I go to class for some of my languages, that I don't feel like I've made much progress, because the progress you make really depends on what you put in. And so to speed things up in terms of like learning more in a week or a month or a year, it really is to do with how much time you spend thinking about, considering, and using or listening to the language in between your classes and between your study periods. That's what makes the difference. That's the difference between an effective language learner who seems to learn a language very quickly and one that seems to take a lot of time over years and years and years just to get to the very basic level in a language. That's the key difference that I've noticed through all my courses and my life generally. So if you do that, then you'll be fine. Okay, I think I got to the end of these questions. A lot of them are very similar. One was just travels. I don't know what that means. And German, I don't know. I mean, language-specific things. I can give some tips on things like that. I find sometimes that the tips that I give about languages in sort of just specific languages could apply to a number of languages. Let me just see, because I've got quite a lot of questions that have come in, and I'm aware that I haven't read any of your questions yet. So let me see. Yeah, it takes a bit of time to understand native speakers. Sometimes, for sure, absolutely it can. Some types of what I've noticed as well is that certain types of English for some people are harder or easier depending on what you're used to. So I've met people who find Indian English hard, or find British hard. To understand Scottish English. They sometimes have a Northern Irish English. It's often quite difficult for foreigners to understand it if they've been exposed to it. So yeah, you do have that in it. I think it's a case of if you're focusing on the dialect or an accent particularly, and use an app like Radio Garden and focusing on some of the radio stations in that part of the world, so you can be exposed to more of the language. I'd say that would be a really, really good way to help combat that and get used to listening to the language. Okay, I've got a question here. When you're a beginner in a language and you study a word, it might be a B2 or even C1 level, do you write it down and memorize it, or just leave it for now? So that's a very good question, actually. There are certain words that are definitely, or phrases and expressions that are often more expected at the higher levels of language learning. Do you not learn it just because you perceive it as being that? Not really. I would say if you need that word because it is important for your way to express yourself and give information about your life and your situation, learn it by all means. Let me give you an example. So let's say you live in a place where there's a certain type of bird that everyone talks about. It might be the bird that's on the flag. It might be a bird that's just very common where you live. And that bird in your language is actually a word that you use quite a lot, or you see quite a lot. It's very likely that if you're in conversation and you're explaining about where you're from and what's important to your region, that bird name, even though a bird name might be something that you learn way further in advance in a language, you may never even learn it because some natives don't know it. But knowing that word sometimes is important to you. So I'd say if it's that kind of thing, yes, too many words all at once, and it actually ends up demotivating you, is when you've got so many words, a big list of words. And I think many of us have been in that situation where you're in a class and they say, Miss, Sir, how do you say this? Teacher, how do you say that? And they ask like all these questions, and at the end they've got like 15 pages of vocabulary that you can't possibly learn because it just doesn't make sense anymore. And that's where it gets a bit silly. And I think we're not robots, we're not computers. It needs to be a natural process sometimes with the vocabulary learning, and it needs to be in context, and it needs to be something we do that's actually going to benefit us. So yes, I'd say it's still worth learning them, but know when to draw the line and say there's too many of them now. And I still don't know the word for table, but I've learned the word for swallow, or I've learned, you know what I mean? It's getting your priorities right, because you know yourself, and polyglots often have this problem where they've learnt, or they already know words that are related, and then they feel very confident in saying, yeah, I'm B2, 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 but actually they can't say, I went to the shops and I looked in the window and I saw a nice dress. They can't say things like that because those words are often quite different. So it's really important to sort of get into that, and to realize where the holes in your vocabulary, and to make sure they're filled in before you go too crazy with these sort of very highfalutin, very advanced words. Okay. Yeah, and thank you for that comment into cultural coaching. Yeah, I'm glad that you've experienced this as well, so you can kind of confirm my thoughts and what I'm saying. So let me just see if there's any other questions here, and I see that there are some questions on YouTube as well, so I'm just going to check. Qual método você aconselhava para um falante de português aprender espanhol? Isso é uma boa pergunta, eu não sei, porque eu não sei, eu não conheço todos os livros para espanhol, para os lusófonos. Então, eu não sei, depende muito das livrarias no lugar. Acho que isso é importante, olhar um pouco todos os livros que você pode ver na livraria onde você mora. Isso é igual para todas as línguas. Eu acho que com o mercado para os livros em português para aprender espanhol, para mim é um pouco difícil, porque eu não aprendi espanhol assim, eu não tenho experiência com isso, mas é um bom conselho para cada idioma é fazer isso, e passar 1 hora, 2 horas somente olhando, lendo os livros na livraria para saber quais são os livros melhores para você, porque é uma coisa muito pessoal. Hi Richard, do you know the Welsh anthem? It's cool. I listened to it during Six Nations. Fantastic. I do know it. I don't know how to sing it though. But yes, I do know it. I know, I've heard it many times. Is Maori grammar very different from grammars of Indo-European languages? Tim, absolutely. It's very different indeed. It's a lot of fun, but very different. And making language learning app coming out next year. Great to hear that, Edward. Well done. Congratulations on the project, and I look forward to hearing more about it soon. Thank you, Benjamin. You're very sweet. Thank you. Nice of you to say. Saluton. Hola, salutaciones desde Catalunya. Desde Catalunya, molt bé. Moltes gràcies. Com va, Javi? Assalamu alaikum. Walaikum salam. Do you understand Scottish Gaelic better than Irish? At the moment, yes, probably because that's the one I'm focused on. But I probably knew a bit more Irish before I started Gaelic. Hopefully I'll be able to learn both at some point. I want to learn the languages of the Isles. It's important to me, I think. Just being from the Isles, I think it's important to learn the languages of the Isles. So you've got a question. What's your philosophy on speaking early in your language? Okay, yeah, I actually quite like speaking as early as possible, just because it's nice to activate the brain, and it's for it. I think that trying to use your knowledge actively actually helps to reinforce the practice that you need to internalize the language itself. So I'm very much for Say what you can say as soon as you can say it, and keep practicing it as much as possible. Same with writing or reading, whatever you do. The more practice you get, the better, to be honest with you. Feel uncomfortable speaking? You feel uncomfortable speaking? Yeah. The lack of vocabulary, that happens, Abel, that happens all the way through the process to everyone, to me as well. Sometimes you feel like you're repeating the same words over and over again in some languages because you've learned, say, the bare minimum you need to communicate, and then you feel like, I get this in Greek quite a lot, or in Albanian, and in Turkish sometimes I get it. I feel that, yeah, I'm using a word or an expression or a way of communicating the idea, but it's not fine-tuned enough. And I know that feeling very well. It's a very big problem at intermediate, when you get to the intermediate levels in a language. But yes, I would say it's normal. Go with what you know and try to learn. For example, if you notice that, try and make a mental note, or even if you can write it down, if you're in that position to write it down. Write down the word that you wanted to say, learn it, and then try in the next conversation to use the new word. That often helps. I can stop making my own sentences, and they are long sentences and just 2 days in Spanish. Spanish is okay. Is really case 5 language. What? Oh, class 5 language. I don't know what a case 5 language is. Sorry, so far as I don't know what you mean by class 5 language. Swedish and Norwegian more similar to each other than Bulgarian and Macedonian. I actually think Norwegian and Swedish are probably as similar to each other as Bulgarian and Macedonian. Yeah, they're fairly similar. You can communicate without any problems. As a Swede in Oslo, you can go in and just order things and answer and talk to people. It's really not that difficult. And with Bulgarian and Macedonian, it's a similar kind of scenario. You can communicate fairly well. There are obviously with both groups of languages, there are times when you don't understand each other, or you think you understand each other, but actually the word means something slightly different in the other language. So you have those kinds of experiences in both. Having studied both sets of them, Swedish, Norwegian, Bulgarian, and Macedonian, I can confirm that they do feel like they occupy different parts of my brain. And that's kind of, for me, and it's not very scientific, I know, but I have learned things like, for example, I learnt Ladino. I studied Ladino, and Ladino didn't feel, for me anyway, as different as, say, these. But again, I didn't get as far into them as I did as far as I did with these. But it's not that I would disagree that any of them are languages or dialects or whatever. That's really not important to me. It's because I believe that people as a group decide whether or not they speak a language, and that's just the way. That's the start of that process of diversifying, right? We speak a different dialect, a different language. Wherever you see, it's when they agree. So, for example, Montenegrin, its own, the official language of Montenegro. Now, many people will say, "Oh no, but it's basically Serbian, or it's the same language." Look, I mean, they've got the right as a nation to say that they speak Montenegrin, the same way as America would have the right to say they speak American if they wanted to, because the languages start to diverge, and where people agree they become different languages is one thing, but many languages have gone through this process. I mean, Afrikaans wasn't recognized as a different language for many years. It was seen as Cape Dutch. It was seen as Dutch, right? And then it was officially recognized, but it's gone through the same kind of process. And I don't think anybody really argues so much now about Afrikaans being a different language to Dutch or Flemish. It's interesting. People often perceive Flemish as being different to Dutch, but actually in Belgium, the official language is Dutch, along with French and German. It's not Flemish. Flemish is seen in Belgium as the spoken language that people use. So it's a very interesting dynamic with this. And a similar thing happens in Switzerland with Swiss German. Swiss German is not actually one language. Swiss German is many dialects. It's not, we only talk about Swiss German outside of Switzerland. In Switzerland, people would not ask each other if they speak Swiss German. They'd say, "Do you speak Zürichdeutsch, Zurich German, or do you speak Zugdeutsch or Berndeutsch or whatever?" They would never ask a question like, "Do you speak Schweizerdeutsch?" It's a thing that's used with people externally. It's very strange, but actually, Swiss German, I would argue, Swiss German is as different a language. For me, I perceive it so, because Germans, we need subtitles to understand it on TV often, and many German speakers in Germany would often think that a Swiss accent is Swiss German, and it's not, because and it's a similar thing with Scots in Scotland. People often mistake Scottish English for Scots, and that's not what it is. It's a very strange dynamic, whereas Swiss German, they don't tend to be very vocal about it being a different language. They're quite happy being Swiss German, and they call it a dialect of German. Whereas, other languages that are also related quite strongly together and quite close, they will feel that they need to assert their independence, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. For me, it depends on, I think, if people have that sort of the identity, and the languages can be similar but be different languages, right? And they can be different peoples. So it's happened all the way throughout history, and no linguist and no just somebody with a very strong opinion has really the right to sort of change the way history's always been. Anthropologically, that's how we've developed as people. I mean, we're different countries, different cultures, speaking different languages. Originally, there were all the Slavic languages were one language. All of the Germanic languages were one language. They've all come from the same roots as Indo-European, right? So it does seem a little bit absurd that in modern times we obsess a little bit and tell people they're not who they are, they're not speaking the language they want to speak. It feels a bit weird that we hit someone with a stick for saying that, whereas before it's always been like that. Nothing's changed, and nothing's going to change. Whether somebody, a linguist or anyone else, stands up and says, "Oh no, it's the same language," well, okay, you've said that, that's your opinion, that's fine. It's very similar, yes, but it's on this track to diversifying. And then when people talk to me about, especially like Croatian, Bosnian, Serbian, Montenegrin, people get very excited and very passionate about this, because it's very recent history, right? It's very recent history, and I get it. But the paths are diverging. That's just fact. I mean, whether anybody in any of the world likes it or not, it's just the way things are changing. And me acknowledging and seeing that does not change the fact of what's happening. You could argue with Greek and Cyprus. In Cyprus, the Cypriot Greek is quite different to the Greek in Greece. Will they at some point get to a point where it's just officially called a different language, Cypriot Greek, and we don't talk about it as being Greek, just a related language? Quite probably. But yeah, there we go. It just depends on the relationships between the neighbouring languages and the neighbouring countries, and how everything goes. And like I say, Switzerland's a very interesting place because of this thing. And then Luxembourgish, for example, how Luxembourgish people started asserting that Luxembourgish is a language, and they didn't really care until war, because then when people said, "Oh, you're speaking German," they're actually, no, we're not speaking Luxembourgish. And it's been a road for Luxembourgish to be used and respected as a language itself, even in Luxembourg. So yeah, it's a very interesting question that I got into a very long tangent about, and I hope I didn't bore any of you with my thoughts on that. But it's super interesting. I love these questions of language, dialect, and what's what. They're my thoughts on it. Anyway, how do I remember vocabulary? I remember vocabulary by getting exposed to it as often as possible and using it and learning what I need to learn. Curious about learning Balkan languages. I'd like to learn Serbian, Croatian, etc. Does it get confusing rather than they complement each other? So, Luis, if you're trying to learn a number of similar languages, especially Balkan languages or Slavic languages generally, it's good to choose one at first and get really good at it. So my recommendation would be, Serbian and Croatian are both pretty cool languages to learn. It just depends on where you're planning on going. I would say choose the language that you're going to get to use. It's a waste of time learning a language if you're trying to get to a good level if you're never going to use it and never going to get to speak it. So I would definitely say go for a language that you're going to use, right? And does it get confusing? Absolutely, it gets confusing learning similar languages. I always said that there were certain languages I would never study. So in the beginning, I said I would never study Bulgarian because I speak Macedonian and they are similar. I said I would never learn Norwegian. I said I would never learn Slovak or Ukrainian or Belarusian. A number of languages I said I would never learn. But because obviously Macedonian is my home language and I feel quite confident in it, learning Bulgarian ended up not being such a big problem. But I've been speaking Macedonian as a home language for 15 years. So it's kind of a big difference, for me now learning Bulgarian after a certain amount of time. But there are languages, for example, that I find I studied Slovak and I could communicate in Slovak a little bit for the polyglot gathering a few years ago. And then actually afterwards, I never got to use it. I never heard it much. And it just sort of withdrew back into my Polish and Czech. And that's kind of how I built up my Slovak, using that knowledge of Polish and Czech to sort of inject into my Slovak and learn it relatively quickly to be able to communicate my ideas. I could already understand it before. I can still understand it pretty well, but to actively speak Slovak is a very different thing. So yeah, I'd say choose wisely, choose the one you want, and choose the one you're going to use. Okay. Been learning Spanish for about a year now, and will continue to do so in September 2020. Moving to Barcelona, it's fantastic. Have a fantastic time there in Barcelona. Beautiful place. And you'd love to learn Catalan. You will definitely hear a lot of Catalan in Barcelona, and hopefully you'll get to learn it as well. But Catalan's a lovely language. Will it cause confusion between the two? Potentially, yeah. It will. It depends on how strong your Spanish is, because Catalan and Spanish are related languages, and some things are a bit strange. So some things are, like for example, in Spanish you say voy a hacer, and it means I will do. Okay. In Catalan, if you translate that literally, you say vaig is I go, vaig fer. It means it's like basically I go to do, and in Spanish you say voy a hacer. I go to I do, I go to do, something like that, right? But the translation to Catalan actually means I did. Vaig fer, no sé, unes coses molt interessants, però és molt different. It's very different. It doesn't mean the same thing. It means the past tense instead of the future tense. So there's some very strange things like that. There are also some words that are different, and some that maybe look a bit more like Italian or French in Catalan. Some words just don't look like anything. Like the word for yellow is groc, and La casa groga is the yellow house, or el cotxe groc, the yellow car, you would say in Catalan, and groc is yellow. I have no idea where groc comes from. It's a very different word. But you have a go at it. It's a lot of fun, and Catalan's a lovely language. And the accent's very different, so that helps actually with Catalan and Spanish, because the accent in Catalan is very, very different to Spanish. And I find that helps when languages are different, at least the way you pronounce them. Okay, let me see. Learning Danish, that's a cool word. Danish is great. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to read some of this. Hello, fires of Morocco. Nice to see you. Okay. Do you need volunteers for the Polyglot Conference? Benjamin, potentially, yeah. So we've been looking out for some volunteers. There could be room for some more volunteers potentially as well. So look out for that. Join the forum. Join the event officially, and we'll let you know. Okay. If I was learning anything super fast, it just takes time, unfortunately. There's no super fast, it's just how many hours you put into it a day. No. Nice to see you from China. Wow, good to see you, Nathan. Thank you for joining. Okay. And any tricks to quickly switch between languages? Practicing switching is very important. So if you're having conversations or lessons, try and schedule the lessons back to back so that you have to switch. Making yourself do that will help. And broccoli. I like your name. It's cool. Okay, what do you think? Is Italian more similar to Romanian or to French? Difficult, probably. Yeah, difficult to call, Tim. I don't know. Sometimes it feels closer to Romanian, but Romanian's got an awful lot of words that are very different to the other Romance languages. French is also, in terms of Romance languages, it's kind of French is at one end and Romanian's at the other for me, and then in between you've got the other ones, and some are a little bit more to that side, some are more to this side. I would say just because of the way verbs work in Italian and Catalan, for example, Catalan and Italian would be more towards the Romanian side, and then the verbs and that with the others, I'd say Spanish and Spanish, Portuguese, Galician would be kind of a bit more over here towards the French, so possibly more towards Romanian. But it's very arbitrary, very subjective view. Okay, let me just see if I can see more suggestions on learning German. German, I would say, is finding a book that you really like is really important, because if you don't like the book or the material that explains it, then you're not going to get very far with it. You've got to enjoy what you're doing. So I would say, make sure you get a course that you like and works for you and works with you. O que significa para você criar uma consciência na língua para aprender, para estar aprendendo. Não sei que quer dizer isso. Isso é uma coisa que a consciência é isso, para pensar na língua mesma, uma coisa assim. Você quer dizer? Não sei. Não é muito claro para mim para responder. Okay, let me see. And let me see if there are any other questions I can see here. I'm seeing lots of hellos. Hello. Not as many questions on Instagram. And I'm going to check on Facebook to just have a look to see if Facebook has any questions for me. Costa Rica. Thank you, John. That's nice of you to say. In terms of earning money potential, do you think that learning Mandarin Chinese is worthwhile? The huge time commitment required. It is if you're looking at jobs that need Chinese. One of those big myths, I think, is that people say, learn this language and you'll get lots of money. It doesn't always work like that. I think if you know that you have industry that deals with certain countries, then that can be really useful. So when I first started working after I did my degree, I actually found that the languages that I needed most in Europe were Spanish, French, and German. I'd say French and German, most, because there are very few people that speak them well enough with English as a native language to do business and to deal with clients. And so that was the biggest thing for me. And then I'd say after that it was Spanish, and then after that I would say possibly Italian, and then I actually found that Swedish and Dutch were the next languages that were very important to me to speak, because when you're dealing with clients in Sweden and in the Netherlands, even though their level of English is quite high, when they're at home doing things that are to do with just their normal life, they do expect services in their own languages. So, and there are also very few people who have English as a native level or available on the job market who speak those languages. So sometimes even what you perceive as a sort of a language that people already speak perfect English and not a very big language compared to, say, Chinese, that actually the jobs can be sometimes there because they've got a lot of developed industry, they've got the developed countries, they've got a lot of things, people, a lot of spending power. So there are a lot of things to take into account with what would work for a job. So I would say, yeah, learning Chinese can work out, but I've also met people who have said that they learned Chinese for that reason and then didn't get to use it. So you have to find the opportunities. The opportunities do not come to you. You need to find out the opportunities and seek them out and to do it. Oh, wow. Okay, John. Nice learning Canada. And it's like Telugu. Fantastic. So you're inspired. Thank you very much. My opinion on laddering languages. Yeah, laddering I find is really good. I use it quite a lot. Also, laddering is when you use the language you already know to learn a new language. So you are laddering Portuguese from Spanish. Yeah, it is quite a good way of doing it because you see the similarities more quickly, and it's more obvious how the languages help each other, so that you can learn them more quickly. At least you can learn them and see which words are the same, which words are different, which really helps. What was that? Okay, let's be. Det lite spinbart. Den is polyglot conference language event after that soon. Stephen, that's actually 2 week time, so you're in time. Just go to polyglotconference.com and you can go in there and actually register now. Yeah, for the conference. So yeah, see you there. Speak Scots. That's great. Let me see. The language is okay. Learning a language with a specific dialect is worth it. Yeah, it's worth it if you're going to use it. I mean, if you're going to move to a place where they speak a dialect, it's good to learn the dialect because then you get to speak to people, and it takes down some barriers actually when you speak a dialect. So to learn the local way of communicating is actually quite important sometimes. Yeah. Okay, any tips for laddering a third or another language on top of Spanish or Portuguese? So there are quite a few things that you can use. Maybe if you want to learn Catalan, Asimil have a book in Spanish to learn Catalan, so you could probably do that, and you'll find that quite useful actually. Garrett, try that out now. That's good and also really easy. Thank you, John. Aye. Good on you, Stephen. That's great. Let me see. On Facebook, I'm conscious that I haven't seen the questions yet. So, big fan. Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you, Gal. Looking forward to seeing you at the conference too. That'd be cool. Make sure you come up and find me and say, I'm going to make myself as available as possible at the conference so that I can actually talk to everyone. I want to talk to as many people as possible. Please share your thoughts on learning Czech. Oh my, Czech. A lot of fun. A bit of a challenge, especially learning to memorize the words can be quite challenging in Czech because it was my first Slavic language, so I found it slightly difficult learning all the words, but it gets there. It takes time. People worry about the cases, but the cases tend to follow patterns that are quite predictable, and also you need to learn them as and when you need them. So I mean, just learning the cases for the case sake is very much, I think, the job of somebody learning the theory of the language and not the practical language itself. I think that it's more important if you want to actually speak the language to just learn it in context. So yeah, I'd say don't stress too much about the grammar. It gets a bit crazy otherwise. Cześć, Wojtek, cześć. What's the secret to master a foreign language? So D'Angelo, there's no secret. It's just a lot of practice and a lot of work. There's no real secret though to learning languages, I don't think. If there is, no one's told me. Saludos de esa función, Paraguay. Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Todo bien? Sí, muy bien, muchas gracias. Habla. Oh, qué bien, hablas guaraní. Hoy me gustaría aprender algo así. Qué chulo, me gusta mucho. I am happy to get some slow live at home. Cool. Okay, I'm trying to read this. Okay, here we go. How do you deal with more productive during COVID about languages? Yeah, I think signing up for some courses, classes is useful. I think that I did that, so I signed up for some classes so that I could have some structure to my learning, and I was forced to move on each time I had a lesson or had a new class. So I definitely love classes for that because it gives me some real structure to my learning. Thank you very much. You're so kind, Lorena. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Do you think it's possible to learn a language by yourself? Absolutely. Juan, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, learning it on the internet, fun, absolutely. I've learned a number of languages on my own and at free charge, including my home language, Macedonian. I didn't pay for any lessons, really, for that. I just learned it. Great. Dziękuję. Proszę bardzo. Ja też. Też Wojtek. A tam będziesz. Będziemy mówić trochę i po polsku, po angielsku. Tam to będzie bardzo fajnie. Dla mnie bardzo mi się podoba polski, ale nie mam z kim mówić. Let's see. Dans mon cas maintenant, je peux me débrouiller très bien. Français, portugais, espagnol, ma langue maternelle, et un petit peu en anglais. Bien. But for me, it's very hard to think in English, and then to make many mistakes. You make many mistakes when you're having a conversation. Muito obrigado por a conferência. Muito obrigado também. Sim. Então, para mim é assim. So for me, it's exactly the same with thinking. Actually, I don't tend to think just naturally in any language. It's my thoughts are just in neutral, and then I only use language when I speak. But sometimes I make myself think to go through. That's kind of a very forced active process that I go through to do that. So yeah, but actually thinking a language, I don't know if anybody really thinks in a language. I don't know. I think we think in the language, but I don't know if we do. Sometimes we think in the language to translate into the other language, and that's what some people tend to do. But actually thinking in the language constantly, normally the brain works too quickly for you to actually have a language just going on, like an internal monologue in your head all the time. Sometimes it happens, but I think that often your brain works too quickly because your emotions and what you see is too quick to attribute the words to them, and you move on to the next thing very quickly. That's kind of my experience anyway. Actual spoken words are too slow for processing everything that's going on, what I see in the whole stimulus. As a saying, language is a dialect with an army and a navy. It could well be. It could well be. Although, I mean, that's been used as an idea. I think it's often. I think that often with a language and a dialect, it's often a power thing as well for the bigger one to kind of bash down on the other one. And this is why we don't see people saying Norwegian is a dialect of Swedish or Swedish is a dialect of Norwegian, because both countries have they're firm in their independence, and it's a point in their history where things are going pretty well for everyone and everyone's quite happy. So they've got no reason to sort of have a doubt of identity or want to overpower the next neighbour. It doesn't work in the same way there. Whereas in some parts of the world, there is this domination where people want to sort of dominate or put down their neighbours or something like that. There's a lot more going on, and it's different points in history, right, for each country, for each group of people, and I get that, and it's natural. But yeah, it's part of that kind of topic that you're talking about. Did you ever want to learn Finnish or Greenlandic? Chanel? Yeah, I did. I actually studied Finnish. Chanel. I studied it in at the university in Helsinki for a couple of months and really enjoyed it. I did level 3, which is there's a book called Suomen Mestari, and I did books 1 and 2 completely, and I did half of level 3, and really enjoyed it. So that should have been kind of up to like A2 level, probably. I got to A2, start of B1, but then I've not touched it really since, so it's all gone back down. Greenlandic, I would love to learn Greenlandic. It's kind of one of my things that if I could go and spend time in Greenland and just learn Greenlandic, I'd be so happy. We'll see. It's very expensive to go and just live there for a few months. It's not a cheap place to go to, unfortunately. It costs, even the plane ticket's very expensive. As-tu une cahier pour chaque langue que vous étudiez? Que tu étudies? Oui et non. En fait, j'écris les mots, vocabulaire, tout ça dans un cahier. Bien, mais si je les garde, non, je les garde pas, parce que je vois que je les lis plus après. C'est juste vraiment pour vraiment mémoriser les mots, et ça aide un peu avec les mouvements de la main. En fait, ça m'aide un peu à retenir le vocabulaire, la grammaire et tout ça. Mais en fait, non, je fais pas ça. Je les garde pas, mais je le fais. Je le fais quand je l'étudie. Si ça a un peu de sens, je sais pas. J'espère bien. Ok. Cuando aprendes 2 idiomas parecidos al mismo tiempo, soy italiano y francés, y me confundo, es normal. Lo mejor es aprender un idioma muy bien y luego empezar con el otro. Porque haciendo 2 idiomas así tan parecidos al mismo tiempo a veces sí que confunde bastante. Y se confunden mucho, y he visto eso muchas veces en mi vida, y lo mejor es dejar un idioma al lado y luego continuar más tarde. Y yo suelo hacerlo así, un idioma muy distinto y otro idioma muy parecido a otro idioma que ya hablo, y así lo hago y sale mucho mejor. Y también vale para la pronunciación. Por ejemplo, si es un idioma que se parece mucho al oído, como griego, español, también es para la gente, porque se parecen mucho a la cabeza, porque como que los sonidos son casi iguales, que se parecen demasiado para tener los 2 idiomas separados. ¿Vale? Okay, hello everyone, hello. Poliglota Lanzarote. Hola, ¿qué tal? Salut, ça va? Love it. Okay, so unfortunately we're getting to the end of the hour, and I hope that I have I've answered most of the questions that you had. Good little Macedonian, you already speak Bulgarian or Serbian. Tim, I would say the only book that's available is the Macedonian for Beginning and Intermediate Students by Christina Kramer from University of Wisconsin. It's the only one that's available that's any good. Already published. So, yeah, you'd get it, Tim, quite quickly, because you speak Slovene, you speak, I'm guessing you already speak Croatian as well, you understand Croatian or Serbian, so it wouldn't be a very big jump for you to learn. Hi from Lithuania, hello, nice to see you. Okay, so it was very, very nice to speak to you all today. Thank you all very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Join in at the conference, polyglotconference.com, and I will be around for the whole 10 days to talk to you all. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you soon. See you next week.